A lot happened over the weekend, and I will cover almost all of it, and maybe even an aside about the Eagles crushing the Chiefs. But the most important thing that happened this weekend, I think for the world, was the release of the 3 hostages held by the Hamas terrorists and tortured and starved, and the world saw and the world recoiled. Donald Trump was asked about them on Air Force One as he flew to the Super Bowl, cut number 5.
When I see that scene that I saw today with people coming out of helicopters and airplanes that are emaciated, that look like they haven't had a meal in a month, there's no reason for that, and I don't know how much longer we can take it.
Do you want to recast?
I don't know how long we can take it. When I watch people that were healthy people a reasonably short number of years ago, and you look at them today, they look like they've aged 25 years. They literally look like the old pictures of Holocaust survivors. The same thing. I mean, the same thing. And I don't know how long we're going to take that.
It is the same thing. That's why I wanted you to hear that. In the spring of 1944, the Allies received hard intelligence about Auschwitz. They knew there were death camps. And there was a debate about whether or not the Allies ought to bomb the crematoria, whether they ought to bomb the railroad tracks coming in. And they had the ability to hit Silesia from July of 1944 forward. And the U.S. authorities decided not to bomb Auschwitz. Quote, American officials explained this decision in part with a technical argument that their aircraft did not have the capacity to conduct such raids on such targets with sufficient accuracy, and in part with a strategic argument that the Allies were committed to bombing exclusively military targets in order to win the war as quickly as possible. This has been the subject of a great debate in history. I'll talk to Dr. Michael Orden about it afterwards. But we now know that however many of I believe there are 74 hostages unaccounted for. However many are alive, they're being tortured and starved. And today, Israel was pulling out of the Netzarim corridor in compliance with the ceasefire agreement when Hamas announced it was breaching the ceasefire agreement. They weren't going to release hostages this weekend. So Israel has a free hand to go back to the war. Question is, should they, and what should we do to help them? And I'm not an Israeli. I'm not a Jew. I'm a human being, and what they are doing is inhuman. It's depraved. It's barbaric. It's medieval cruelty. It is the Holocaust on a very small scale. Now, we shouldn't be surprised, even though we are surprised. I'm a little bit surprised because I didn't think Hamas, I knew they were cruel and evil, but I didn't think they were stupid. And this is just mind-numbingly stupid and cruel, and the account of the torture that has come out and of the remaining hostages has led some hostage families to beg Netanyahu to do whatever they can to get their people free. And I understand the reaction of parents. And you can have nothing but shared grief with them. But are we really going to make the mistake of what Biden and Blinken and Sullivan did, which is to have an opinion? Our opinion ought to be, whatever you decide to do, we will support Israel. Those are your people. Some of them are our people too, by the way. I think there are 2 more Americans alive in those tunnels, but we can't take over what Israel has been doing for the last 16 months since the massacre of 10/7. But we can say 2 things. If you want to threaten Iran, we're with you. We can give Iran a 3-week deadline, a 2-week deadline, everybody out and Hamas gone, or we destroy you and your oil and your production facilities and your nuclear sites. You got 2 weeks. Get them all out. Or you can say 1 week. You can say we're done. And then you can send in, if you send in the entire IDF and you go house to house and you go into the tunnels, because you're not going to let a second Holocaust, no matter how small it is compared to the first Holocaust, it's still the idea of what's going on there. So horrific that we will support you. We will not micromanage. In fact, I don't know how Blinken and Sullivan and Biden looked themselves in the mirror this morning. Kamala Harris had nothing to do with it. She's clueless about this sort of stuff. I do not know how anyone looks themselves in the mirror this morning that had anything to do with telling Israel to go slow or telling Israel to stop, especially at the beginning of the war, and then not to go into Rafah. Remember, I studied the maps. I would not be surprised if Israel says, people of Gaza, go back to the beach. Leave northern Gaza immediately. Go to Rafah. Go down to the bottom third of the strip, because we're coming back, and we're coming back hard and fast. And the only way you can stop that is to release all of there are 74 bodies and people, alive and dead. They were so mind-bogglingly cruel when one of the hostages said in the little parade, which is a war crime, "I can't wait to see my wife and daughter," and they were chuckling because they were dead. But what the president said is the reaction around the world among civilized people. Now, you might not be a civilized person. You might not care. Israel has waged a just war, and they have done so within all the laws of war concerning proportionality and intent. And what they get for that are those three men, living cadavers. They will recover, not mentally. It will be a long time. They might endure. They might be witnesses. Witnesses matter a lot. But it is clear to me now that Hamas held back everyone that they knew would spark this kind of a reaction, because they know. I think President Trump said, I want to play it for you again, cut number 5.
When I see that scene that I saw today with people coming out of helicopters and airplanes that are emaciated, that look like they haven't had a meal in a month, there's no reason for that. And I don't know how much longer we can take it.
Do you think you want to recast?
I don't know how long we can take it. When I watch people that were healthy people a reasonably short number of years ago, and you look at them today, they look like they've aged 25 years. They literally look like the old pictures of Holocaust survivors. The same thing. I mean, the same thing. And I don't know how long we're going to take that.
Now, that is also, it's important to remember, the treatment of prisoners this way is a war crime. Hamas cannot stay in the Strip. It has to be, as Germany was after World War II, denazified. It has to be de-Hamasified. And the 2-week deadline might be, you can put them on a boat, Iran. And we should be talking directly to Iran. Iran is running this game. I don't know how much Hamas listens to anyone now, because they're crazy and they're evil. But they're negotiating with these people? Are you crazy? You can't negotiate with these people. They are killing the hostages. You have to go get the hostages. And you have to, I believe, that they're sitting around the table in the security cabinet of Israel. And the only role for the United States is to say, whatever you decide to do, Mr. Prime Minister and government, we are behind. What do you need from us? We'll give you whatever you need. And if you think we need to say to Iran, you have a week to get everybody out and to get the boat over, to put the Hamas people on, to clear them out, we'll give you a week. No reason to let this go on. There are people starving in the dark. One hostage, 24-year-old man, is wounded, has not received care, and hasn't been in a ventilated space since he was taken captive. He's shackled. All right, this is medieval stuff. This is the worst stuff I have seen. It is World War II on a scale of 72 people. But the state of Israel was founded to prevent this from ever happening again. It's happening within 10 miles of their border. And I don't think they're going to let it go on. I don't know. Not my call. I'm not an Israeli. I know there are Americans in that tunnel, though, as well. And I think the civilized world has to say the same thing. We have nothing to do with these people. They are outcasts. And whatever you do to them is fine with us. They should be hung by the neck until dead if we ever get our hands on them. And that would be That would be merciful and civilized. But what they're doing is barbaric, medieval, abomination, and Donald Trump voiced that. And I am grateful that we have a president who has the ability to say that and to say it succinctly, because for 16, well, not for 16, for 15 months, the first 15 months, we dithered and those people died and starved and were tortured. But Olivia Beavers joins me. She's with the Wall Street Journal. Hello, Olivia. How are you?
Hi, Hugh. I'm good. How are you?
Good. I
Sorry,
just
putting
saw that Lindsey Graham unveiled a Senate version of the reconciliation budget plan that would spend $150 billion more on defense in the first go-around. What's that look like on the House side?
We've heard so many different numbers about defense side. I've heard half of that from different people. The thing is, there are so many numbers being thrown around as the House tries to nail down its final numbers. And despite, I think, the speaker and some other people in leadership coming out and saying that they thought they were going to be rolling out a plan this time today, they're still hashing things out, and they might, still have some distance before they can actually roll out a deal. So the House has not presented a plan, and the speaker said they might take a few more days to work things out. So we're waiting to see what that looks like. But there's clash.
The first thing I heard that Speaker Johnson said was last week. He said, we'll get it to you on Friday. And that didn't happen. So I'm more curious about what's in his plan than what's in Lindsey Graham's plan. Are you?
Yes, and let me tell you, it's been a little bit of a headache because you're chasing after numbers, and then that plan's scrapped, or they go into a meeting and they are onto a new set of numbers. And so it's been, as someone who has not in the past covered this as closely as I am now, the Journal is and our readership's very interested in it. It's a little bit dizzying just trying to figure it out. And I think the problem is there's a lot of false starts. Johnson says, we're going to have a plan soon. We're going to have a plan soon. And so you start aggressively texting and calling all of your sources, and then they go, there's no plan yet. And so.
All right. So I want the audience to understand the House has to agree on a budget. And that budget can include a single year deficit. All right. So they can say we're going to have a deficit of $2 trillion in fiscal year. I guess we're still in fiscal year 25, right? So they could do that if they want and then spend the rest. But they have to agree on what that deficit number is. Am I correct?
Yes. And so the budget is sort of the blueprint for them to be able to move forward with the reconciliation process and unlock that. But there's this push to get it done quickly so that President Trump can have the money to fund his agenda. Well, there's still debates internally about whether it should be one bill or two bills. But at the same time, you're starting to crash on a government funding deadline as your Republicans are trying to sort out what's happening with reconciliation. We're approaching basically a month out from when government funding expires. So basically these huge bills that Republicans are vowing to get done are starting to crash on top of each other in terms of deadlines. And that is not a position that the party wants to be in.
Well, I'm not going to worry about that as a Republican partisan. I wish them well. I'm not worried about the budget, the government shutting down, even though some Democrats are saying that's a good way to stop all this nonsense that they don't like about Doge. But I am mostly concerned with if they can get their arms around that gallon of red ink that they got to spill, they'll be able to figure out what to spend what on. But that's really sort of the Freedom Caucus number. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like I think the budget chairman, Jody Arrington, him and Chip Roy are pushing for more cuts than some other Republicans would be comfortable with. And so there's sort of this tension in the party of how far do they take it and getting pushback. And Medicaid is one of the ones where Republicans want to see more cuts. And then you have others in the party who are arguing that would impact low-income women and children who actually are now Trump supporters, and not all of them, but it's now a bigger group of people who back Donald Trump. And so they're trying to say, please don't do too many intense cuts because you might actually be impacting your own voters. So there's this ongoing dialogue of where to do cuts and how much.
Olivia, does anyone make the argument which I've made for a long. Medicaid doesn't work. It's a piece of paper, and the money goes to the states, and they do what they can with it. But the fact is, most doctors don't want Medicaid. They don't even want Medicare, but they won't take Medicaid. Does anyone bring up the problem with Medicaid?
I think some have. It's usually the ones who are interested in cutting the funding, but from more of the centrist and moderate kind of rank and file Republicans, they're the ones who are more likely to be defending it and saying, if you cut it, you're going to be hurting us back home.
That's not a very good argument. I'd love to meet a Republican who makes that argument. They probably have never, ever, ever tried to get Medicaid to work. I was a regulator out here for a while, and you can't get doctors to take Medicaid. You can't do it because Medi-Cal, which is the California equivalent with which I'm most familiar to, I left the state in 2016. It didn't matter how much money they sent us. You still could. The reimbursement rates are wrong. And you don't end up helping anybody. You got to open up clinics and let people go to the clinics. Olivia, I want to switch over to what Lindsey Graham is doing. What is the Senate's play here? They're not going to, the House isn't going to do that.
Well, something curious just happened. In the past hour or so, some reporters caught Speaker Johnson in the hallway, and he claimed that after they were at sharing the box at the game last night, he was able to convince Lindsey Graham that one bill was the best approach. So we've reached out to Lindsey Graham's office to see what his version is, but there's a chance maybe that Graham is backing off of the two-bill approach. And Graham had been pushing basically, the argument is 2 versus 1. If you go for 2, you can get border, energy, and some of Donald Trump's top priorities funded earlier. But there's concern that if you do 2, the second bill, which would include Donald Trump's tax cuts and tax priorities, won't have the support and won't be able to get passed. So that's why you have some Republicans pushing for one, quote, one big, beautiful bill.
So Lindsey Graham moved backwards on that because, you spend 10 hours with the president on Air Force One in the box. He's going to do the Lyndon Johnson treatment on you, right?
Donald Trump definitely, the president definitely has that influence with Republicans, but that's coming from the speaker's mouth. So I think we're waiting to see if that is where Senator Graham is.
We'll keep following you, Olivia, over at the Wall Street Journal. You should be following Olivia on X at Olivia_Beavers. Thank you, Olivia. Let me do my American Federal market update. AmericanFederal.com buys and sells precious metals. If you want to buy gold, especially, and you want to do it in ounces or quarter ounces or tenth of an ounce, or you want to go up and buy something bigger than that, the more you buy, the lower the commission. If you want to sell gold, old bracelets, old gold, old rings, they also will buy gold from you, but they take commissions on both ends, whether you're buying or selling, because they're in business. Call Nick Grovich and his team, 1-800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. Here are the numbers today. At this hour, the Dow is up 0.3%. The S&P is up 0.69%. The NASDAQ is up 1.8%. And gold is up 1.65%. It's at $2,935 an ounce. Now, I've never, ever reported to you that gold was at $2,935 an ounce because it's never been there before. And I don't know why, other than the prospects of the tariffs on steel and aluminum worry some people that there's going to be a trade war, and a bunch of people don't know what's going to cost what, so they're out hoarding gold. I don't hoard gold. I buy it the same time every year in January. I did it with Nick this year in January, and the reason is that's how you dollar cost average an investment in a diversified portfolio. And then I or the fetching Mrs. Hewitt take it and put it in the safety deposit box and forget about it. That's the panic money, runaway money. I call it whatever you want. It's just gold. And it's a part of a diversified portfolio. Bought it from Nick, very easy. Send them the money, they send you the gold. And they tell you beforehand what it's going to cost. 1-800-221-7694. Or you can visit AmericanFederal.com. Find out all about them. All I have to do is tell you they've been in the business for 40 years. A lot of people in the gold business haven't been in there for a long time. A lot of people in the gold business want to sell you something else. Not Nick. Nick is a straight up, here's the gold, here's the cost, Here's the silver. Here's the cost. He and his team, just call them. 1-800-221-7694. Coming up, Dr. Michael Oren's going to join me. I'm going to ask him about these things. In the meantime, though, I want you to hear some of Bret Baier's interview with President Trump yesterday in the event. You, like me, missed it because you couldn't figure out how to work your TV. Because YouTube TV says you are not where you bought this. I don't watch a lot of TV. And so YouTube TV didn't believe it was me. And if the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau was still working, I'd sick him on him. But Russ Vought's doing the Lord's work there. Here's Donald Trump talking to Bret Baier, cut number 1.
So if all goes to plan, when do you think families will be able to feel prices going down, groceries, energy, or are you kind of saying to them, hang on, inflation may get worse until it gets better?
No, I think we're going to become a rich. Look, we're not that rich right now. We owe $36 trillion. That's because we let all these nations take advantage of us. Same thing, like $200 billion with Canada. We owe $300. We have a deficit with Mexico of $350 billion. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let that happen.
Sports has always been something that America.
All right, keep going. Cut number 2.
You know, it seems the first days of this administration are like a no-huddle offense. You know, plays going down the field, one after another. There's a long list of things you've already got done in 3 weeks. Big border policy changes, ICE crackdowns on criminals, taking biological men out of women and girls' sports, big energy policy changes. So what's different with you and your administration? The difference between the 45th president and the 47th president?
Well, with the 45th, I had tremendous opposition, but I didn't know people, and I didn't have the kind of support that I needed. I put people in office, some really great ones, but I had some that I wouldn't have put. I would have, known better if it were a couple of years later, or if I had a little more experience in D.C. I was a New York person, not a D.C. person. And I had a lot of opposition. I just noticed, I looked on the stage for the recent inauguration, and I'm looking, it's like a who's who of Washington. Well, if you look on the stage for the first one, it was just the opposite.
So some of your plays have raised some questions.
He's he didn't credit the Hugh Hewitt show. And I think Bret should have credited the Hugh Hewitt show. I'll talk to Bret about that because I think everyone heard that first right here on this program.
I always knew Bret was a great host.
It was a great bit that came out of the Hugh Hewitt show. And that's what I'm just saying. Just credit the Hugh Hewitt
that's
show.
All you're gonna. That's all you're gonna go.
That's all I'm gonna do.
That's as far as you're prepared to go.
I just setting the record straight.
Of course you
just
are.
Setting the record straight.
Straight as a dog's hind leg.
Donald Trump, cut number 7.
The Vice President suggested that if the Supreme Court rules in a way that you don't like, they can just enforce it by themselves. Do you agree with that?
I don't know even what you're talking about. Neither do you. Who are you with?
Up close.
Who?
Up close.
Oh, no wonder. I thought they died. Are they still around? I haven't read them in years. I thought they died. All right, go ahead.
It's
Give
like
it
there's
time.
a trap door in the bottom of Air Force One.
Give it time, Mr. President. They might not have been working by the time you landed. I don't know. Huffington Post. He doesn't know what he's talking about either. Dr. Michael Oren served as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations and the United States for a long time. Ambassador Oren, I opened the show by saying the pictures and the analysis of what happened to those 3 men who were released on Saturday are horrific. They reveal Hamas to be every bit the terrorists that we knew, but also far more cruel, depraved, and outright stupid as well. What is the reaction in Israel to that image?
I think we're dealing with a society that is so injured, so wounded and deeply wounded, physically, emotionally. I'll go out on a limb and say that a majority of Israelis, we know this for a fact from the polls, will support the second and even the third phase of the ceasefire, which means basically if we can get all the hostages back, and by the way, that's a big if, because I don't think Hamas is actually going to give us all the hostages back. They're going to save some for a quote-unquote rainy day. They said, well, we don't know where they are, they'll say. And the Israeli army will pull out, and Hamas basically can retake the Gaza Strip. We're willing to pay that price in order to get the hostages back. But I think within Israeli society, I can't adduce any statistical evidence to support this. The Israeli society understands that this fight is not over, and in fact, it's just beginning, and that we are going to take this to the end, which means the end of Hamas.
It presented to me, Dr. Oren, and I began the show by saying, the Allies could have bombed Auschwitz from the spring of 1944 on. There's been a great debate in history that they did not do so. And so my answer to what should we do is whatever Israel wants us to do at this point. I really have no idea what Israel wants to do, but they're torturing these people. They're starving them to death. I don't know what Israel can do other than restart the war. And they've said the next hostage release is off.
Right. But you restart the war, you understand we're condemning between 30 and 60 of our citizens to death. Because we know that when we ramp up the military pressure on Hamas, they don't release hostages, they shoot the hostages. And that is a dilemma which no country on earth has ever faced, and which for Israel, uniquely, is the horrific dilemma. I always give an example, Hugh. Tell me if I've done this before in your program. On December 8th, 1941, after the Japanese had attacked American bases throughout the Pacific and took thousands of prisoners and began to torture them and behead them and march them to death, FDR didn't come out and say, listen, we got to stop the war because the Japanese are killing our prisoners, right? They didn't say that. He says, no. He said, unconditional victory. That was it. Unconditional surrender. And because America's a different place than Israel is. And this is it's a unique part of our national DNA, which is this covenant between the state and the people that says that if we fall captive or we're taken hostage, the state will do everything in its power to secure our release. And if that covenant is broken, a significant part of the Israeli population will no longer send their kids to the army.
Well, Dr. Oren, the covenant hasn't been broken. As a non-Jew, non-Israeli, I'm a little bit stunned because those people are dying in those tunnels. To me, and they're being tortured. They're being hung upside down by their feet. They're not being fed. They're being whipped. They're in darkness. One kid's shackled. The 24-year-old is shackled in the darkness. They're executed if you get. It's a dilemma. It's the Sophie's choice come to reality. Is anyone saying, in we go and we go hard and we stay as long as we have to and we blow up every building we need to get to them?
I have a good friend who was a high up in the Mossad involved with hostage negotiations who said to me on October 8th, 2023, that the leaders of the state of Israel should come out and say, listen, we just lost 1,200 people on the battlefield. We're going to lose another 252, the hostages, but we'll save the state. And, that's a logic for many countries. It's not a logic for the state of Israel. And here's one of these moments where you've got to say a little blessing and thank the Lord that you are not the prime minister who has to make this call, because nobody wants to be in that position.
Are you going to withdraw from the Netzarim corridor even in the aftermath of the Hamas announcement that the deal is off?
I would say no. Deal's off, deal's off. And including the continued repopulation of the northern part of the Strip, the return of the Palestinians from the northern part of the Strip who had been resettled in the south, that's going to stop too. Everything's going to stop.
Well, is it going to be back to the beaches with you people? Go back to Rafah, empty the north again?
It could be. It could be. And I'm certain the Israelis, if Hamas is unwilling to deal, the problem is that a large segment of the Israeli population is going to hold Netanyahu responsible and not Hamas. They're going to say that Bibi hasn't been forthcoming enough or that he's backtracking on conditions. I know this from experience. I know it sounds illogical. You remember when the 6 hostages were executed, including Hirsch, Paul, and Goldberg. 100,000 people came out to the street to protest, not against Hamas, but against Bibi. And it was very hard to explain this, even to people in my family here in this country, why this was so. But the assumption among the people who do not like Mr. Netanyahu is that he'll do anything to stay in power, including perpetuating the war at the expense of the lives of these hostages.
I heard the mother of the 24-year-old absolutely understandably scream to a camera, and it rends the heart. Here's my question, Dr. Warren, that applies to the United States. Did we know what they were doing to these people? Because when I saw Gadi Moses come out, I thought, wow, what a hero of Israel. That guy's well, they didn't do to him what they did to these young men or younger men. And I don't know what they did to the women. I'm just appalled that this kind of a cruel barbarity, if we knew it and didn't say it, I'm really angry with did we know this?
Not only do we know it, but we reported it to the UN. About sexual abuse and rape and torture. It was reported. It's been out there. Now it's for people who have been in captivity longer. But I've had contact with former hostages. And I think what they went through, to the degree they could even describe it to me, was too unbearable to listen to. And we don't know the full thrust of this. And there's a certain tendency on the part of the people of Israel to sort of respect their privacy, particularly for people who were victims of sexual abuse. And so when it comes out almost reluctantly. It's not something we wave to the people of the world.
Are there people like me who are just shocked? I knew it was horrible, but
we're not shocked. We're not shocked at all. I'm not shocked at all. I'm surprised that these people are even alive. This is Hamas. This is a medieval satanic terrorist organization. How did you expect them to treat them?
Dr. Oren, when will we know if Israel has gone back to the offensive in Gaza?
Well, there are other considerations. It's not just that Hamas has broken the deal, and the fact that if we go back to military operations, they're liable to execute the hostages they still have. There's also the issues of munitions, and the fact that the army needs a rest. The army itself, as many of these people have been in combat for hundreds of days. There was an old, I think, report that came out during the Vietnam War that said after 40 days of combat, a soldier's effectiveness basically drops to zero. And these have been people, I know people in the army who just say, listen, I'm not physically exhausted, I'm emotionally exhausted. I can't do it anymore. So the army needs a rest, and we have to resupply with munitions, and work very, very closely with the Trump administration. They have to be on the same page with us.
What is the idea of an ultimatum to Iran? Is that current, which is you run this game, you built this cruel, barbaric organization. If our people aren't home in X days, we're coming after you.
See, if I had my druthers, okay, and I know your audience knows that word, not many Israelis do. If I had my druthers, that would be our position. Going after the head of the snake. We have to dry up Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, dry them up. And I'm going to mix my metaphor. The wellspring is Iran, and I think that is crucial. Nothing, and I can't make this point more emphatically, Hugh. Nothing in the Middle East will change, not fundamentally, as long as that regime is in power, and as long as that regime has the potential to make a nuclear weapon.
So, Ambassador Oren, I know you know everyone. We have 1 minute. When they got done talking to Team Trump, did they think that Team Trump is behind Israel?
They who? I'm sorry.
Netanyahu and the team, the government.
I think they came home very optimistic. Very optimistic. I think that the Trump plan for Gaza may have surprised Netanyahu. There's some reports that he wasn't fully briefed on it. But the fact of the matter is he has changed the discourse. The discourse for the last 30 years is the core of Middle East conflict. Of the Middle East conflict is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the only way you can solve that conflict is through the creation of a Palestinian state. All of a sudden, along comes the president and says, no, the source is something else. It's socioeconomic conditions that breed terror, and we have to address those conditions. And that's changing the discourse. I think irreversible.
Good. We got to go back on. Dr. Oren, thank you so much. I always appreciate your time. Follow him on X at Dr. Michael Oren. Harry Anton was on CNN yesterday talking about the popularity of Donald Trump, cut number 15.
CBS News out with a new poll showing that Americans seem to be liking what they're seeing, but it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, I mean, look, but it's not just CBS. I like to take an average of the polls. And holy smokes, I mean, look at what the difference is between now versus 8 years ago during the first Trump term, right? This is Trump's net approval rating on February 10th. You go back to 2017, Trump was already underwater.
9-point swing,
points from the
year over year, apples to apples. Trump's up 4, he was down 5 8 years ago. That's big. He's also got on the right side of an 80-20 issue on gender and on the right side of a 65-35 issue on the border and deportation. He's winning. Keep up the pace. Keep going, no huddle. Now, myphdweightloss.com, 864
644
1900. That's
864
644
1900.
Does not involve drugs. Does
No.
not involve a prescription.
No.
Involves you picking up the phone and calling 864
644
1900.
Yes.
Now, every day I give you credit for losing 50 pounds and keeping them off for 2 years, right? I give you credit every day.
Yeah.
I'm very, very credit driven.
About our sponsor, yes.
Yes. So I just want people to know. You
About
have no
interfactual
complaints.
things, not so much.
I just want people to know. I'm just completely always giving Dwayne credit.
Yes, and then when it comes to things in the actual news, you're like the Wheaton College of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
I don't get that.
You see what Wheaton College did to Russ Vogt over the weekend?
No.
Russ Vogt is a Wheaton grad. They, on Friday, put out a tweet that said, "We congratulate Russ Vogt and we're praying for him," until the woke mob came for him and they said, "No, we're actually not praying for him."
They're not praying for Russ.
And they took it down. They said, "We actually don't want to take a side in this at all."
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so Wheaton went woke.
Wheaton went woke, and Wheaton may go broke.
Wheaton
There are going to be a
broke.
few donors out there that are not going to be happy with Wheaton College.
And we know one, don't we?
I think I don't know who you're talking about, but let's not say.
Okay, well, anyway. So the fun part about the story is, as of this morning, now the anti-prayer tweet has been disappeared. So we don't know what Wheaton thinks about Russ Vogt at this point.
I know what I think about Wheaton at this point, which is that they ain't ever going to be on this show. And I would hope that every Wheaton alumni out there, we're not going to pray for a guy?
Hillsdale said congrats to Russ Vogt. And then when Wheaton undid theirs, Hillsdale said, and just to let you know, we're not going to undo ours.
And by the way, if you would like to apply to a fine liberal arts college in roughly the same area, but which actually has Christian values,
Hillsdale.edu.
Hillsdale.edu. All right, thank you. But see, I gave Dwayne credit right there. I found that story. I gave it to him so he could use it. That's how I run.
That's how you roll. Yes, that's how you roll.
Always be sure to give credit where credit is diverse. Like my PhDweightloss.com, 864-644-1900. From the New York Post, the FCC chief, Brendan Carr, has opened a probe into the National Public Radio methods of operation. I'm very glad he does. I've always been against funding NPR because funding NPR gives them an unfair advantage over everybody else who broadcasts over the airwaves, and funding PBS gives PBS an advantage over every other person who broadcasts. Moreover, they don't even have to do the rules. The rules require that when I tell you I'm a Relief Factor studio and that Relief Factor is my sponsor, I'm obliged to do that. And I hope Brendan Carr gets one set of rules for everyone. We'll come back to that. Right now, I'm pleased to welcome the Attorney General of the great state of Ohio, David Yost. Hi, David. How are you?
Fantastic, Hugh. It's good to see you.
You know, General, Jim Tressel got named Lieutenant Governor today. And I'm kind of still stunned by that news, but do you think he's going to make the punt the official play of the Ohio football program?
I think he's going to be a great LG. He's a good friend and a wise man.
I know. Someone asked me, is he running for governor? I said, I think he's 72. I don't think he really wants to run for governor. General Yost, I got the amicus brief that the state of Ohio filed on its behalf and the behalf of 19 other states in a case called Catholic Charities Bureau, Inc. versus Wisconsin Labor and Industry. And I've read it, and you're right. Would you explain to laymen what Wisconsin Supreme Court did with regard to Wisconsin Labor and Industry Review Commission and Catholic Charities?
Sure. So Catholic Charities applied for a routine charitable tax exemption and was denied. It went up through the courts, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court basically said, yeah, you do charitable stuff, you feed the poor, you house the homeless, you do good stuff, but lots of people do that, and they're not churches. You're not entitled to that kind of religious exemption, that charitable exemption. You're not doing anything different than the government does, for that matter. And so they defined charity out of the mission of the Catholic Church after 2,000 years of unstinting charity work at all corners of the globe. It's an affront to the First Amendment. It's a misapplication of precedent. And most importantly, it's dangerous to American freedom, because if you give the government the ability to decide this is church stuff, but that's not church stuff, that way lies totalitarianism.
Now, General Yost, the Wisconsin case has been accepted by the Supreme Court. And I think it tees up the reversal of Employment Division v. Smith. You certainly argued that in your brief, that Employment Division v. Smith does not work. Are you happy or are you mixed feelings about the fact that Wisconsin stepped in it this way?
Well, one of my goals when I became Attorney General was to see several badly decided 20th century cases overruled, among them Chevron and Roe. We've seen those. Smith is on my list, and Wickard v. Filburn is the last. Those are the last holdouts. So maybe this is going to be a win-win here.
Justice Barrett said, and by the way, did any of the justices recuse themselves from this case for any reason?
Not that I know of.
And because she did not participate in another religious grant of cert in a free exercise case involving Oklahoma's charter school program and the application of a homeschooling Catholic charter school to receive funds, and she did not participate in the grant of cert. I don't know if she's participating in the case. I hope so, because in a previous free exercise case, she said, without deciding, we got to get around to Smith. And this tees it up, because tell people what Wisconsin doesn't want Catholic charities to do anymore, or at least not receive a deduction for doing it.
Basic charity work. So we're not talking about holding mass. We're talking about feeding people that are hungry. We're talking about ministering to the mentally ill, providing home shelter to the unsheltered, and they participate in a lot of other things, including foster care, as a private partner of a public funder. This is a common arrangement all the way around the country. We've got faith-based organizations that are delivering social services, and they're generally protected in the exercise of their religious freedom from government intrusion into the state, which, if there is a wall of separation between church and state, it's not in the Constitution, but if that exists, the wall is there to protect the church from the meddling of the government.
When I read the description of the 4 subdivisions of Catholic charities that the Wisconsin Employment Division, whatever they are, didn't want to have a tax-exempt status, it's like Goodwill Industries. It's just indistinguishable from secular charities doing the same thing, about which no one says anything.
Right. It certainly appears that Wisconsin Supreme Court and their taxation authorities maybe have a little bit of an animus toward religious or faith-based institutions, doesn't it?
Now, how did you get the other states to let you lead on this? Because everyone would want to lead on this case, David Yost.
Well, we saw the case get granted cert, and my SG and I immediately got on the phone with our colleagues and said, we'd like to do this. Fortunately, Ohio has a wonderful SG shop, Elliot Geiser, who you've had on your program, well respected around the country, a former clerk for Justice Alito. And our colleagues were very pleased to have Ohio leading on this.
Now, how long did it take to produce the amicus brief? I'm not sure what the briefing schedule is, but the cert was just granted in December, I believe.
Yeah, it took us a few weeks to get it written and tweaked up. I'm a little proud of this, actually, because one of the arguments is an argument that I drafted personally, which cites the famous case of McCullough versus Maryland.
Oh, yes.
And
the opportunity to tax is the opportunity to destroy. I'm teaching that tomorrow, and I saw that. The opportunity to find religion is the opportunity to destroy religion.
The power to regulate is inherently destructive. So I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court is going to issue a clear overruling of Smith, set down a very clean test that is going to restore some coherence to the jurisprudence in this area.
I want to close here, Attorney General Yost. Where can people, by the way, find this for themselves if they want to read the brief, which is a really fine intro to free exercise and related fields? Where can they find the brief?
Thank you. It's on our website. It's also on the Supreme Court website.
Okay. So if you have your druthers, do they end up saying the Establishment Clause is not implicated here by the grant of status as a charity, as a religious charity to the subdivision of the Catholic Charity? And oh, by the way, you cannot burden the free exercise of people who believe their religious faith requires good works.
My ideal hope is that they say the government may not decide whether religious activity is bona fide or not, that it's a strict scrutiny review, and that almost always any government attempt to exclude something that a church is doing is going to be off limits unless there's a compelling governmental reason, purpose behind it, and it's very narrowly tailored. Neither of those tests are met in this case.
That's strict scrutiny. And I'm glad you said that, because there's a case, Tony and Susan Alamo Foundation out there, where it was a cult operating basically on slave wages, and the Social Security wasn't getting their due, and the court stopped that. You're not arguing to overturn that. You're just arguing for a rule of reason that has to survive strict scrutiny, and this won't if applied, correct?
That's absolutely right. Of course, churches are subject to the law like everyone else. The rule of law means the same rules for everybody. But just like any other fundamental primary freedom, it has to meet that strict scrutiny standard in order to survive a constitutional challenge. Wisconsin's action here doesn't even get close.
It doesn't. This should be easy. This should be 9-0. It won't be, for a variety of reasons, but I hope they get rid of Smith, and congratulations for leading the charge on this, Attorney General David Yost from the great state of Ohio, once again leading the way in all things important, except the Super Bowl. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Someday we'll get there. Thank you, David Yost. Senator Tom Cotton is from Arkansas. He is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he joins me. Good morning, Senator. Good afternoon, Senator. I'm still making the time switch. I have to ask you about the Hamas announcement today that they will no longer be releasing hostages according to schedules. Do you consider that agreement breached?
Hugh, the agreement has been breached almost from the moment Hamas entered it, in ways big and small. And I think the world saw the egregious abuse that these hostages have suffered at Hamas's hands over the weekend when these rail-fin hostages were released. So I'm not surprised at any of this. I'm not surprised that Hamas is going back on its word. That's who they are. That's what they do. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu, and for that matter, Israeli public opinion, has been dead right from the very beginning, in my opinion. Hamas has to be destroyed, no matter how long this deal goes, and hopefully as many hostages get released as possible. Hamas has to be destroyed. It cannot be allowed to remain in power or even extant inside of Gaza.
Now, Senator, I told Dr. Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, earlier on the program, I was shocked by the condition and the cruelty and the starvation of the 3 hostages who were released over the weekend, and their report that other hostages are being tortured and held in shackles and not fed. I don't know what Israel's supposed to do here. All I think the United States should do is support whatever Israel decides to do. What do you think?
Yeah, I've said from the very beginning, Hugh, on October 7th, 2023, that we need to back Israel to the hilt. Israel is a sovereign, democratic nation, one of our closest allies in the world. They're fighting an existential war for their survival, not just against Hamas, but against the rest of Iran's Ring of Fire, like Hezbollah in the north, militias in places like Syria and Iraq, rebels in Yemen, and, of course, ultimately Iran itself, which has attacked Israel twice. Again, the treatment of these hostages, the appearance of those 3 that were released over the weekend just, proves the lie that we've heard time and time again. I can remember, Hugh, being lectured by the United Nations and by Cindy McCain and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar about how there was starvation occurring in Gaza. Yet every time you see these Hamas radicals, they seem to be pretty well fed, maybe even a little plump. And then Jewish hostages are released, and they look like, as President Trump said, Holocaust survivors.
Senator Cotton, your colleague Bill Hagerty tried to do something yesterday, which I just don't think there's any upside. I know you sit down with Margaret Brennan occasionally as well on Face the Nation, but she challenged him on the assertion that USAID was funding Hamas. She said, well, they give money to UNRWA. And she said, oh, that's not Hamas. I don't know if she's dumb or if she's brainwashed, but what do you think?
Well, we've long said that UNRWA is essentially an arm of Hamas and Palestinian terror, and it's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt in recent weeks, Hugh, as hostages have been released, and they've been told us that they were held in UNRWA facilities, to say nothing of UNRWA employees who are also Hamas terrorists. That's why we've totally defunded UNRWA, and we should salt the earth at every UNRWA location throughout the Middle East.
But our legacy media doesn't know that or refuses to believe it. And I'm not singling out Margaret. It just happened to be on her show that this occurred. Does anyone in D.C. not understand what the world is dealing with, which is a Holocaust?
Hugh, in many cases, the liberal media, liberal Democrat, interest groups are all singing from the same progressive hymnal going back more than 100 years, and to acknowledge that UNRWA, or the United Nations for that matter, is riddled with anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments, attitudes, and actions, that places like USAID have largely become a vanguard of the global left, is to acknowledge the failure of their own project. And of course they won't acknowledge that. They'll say, oh, here and there might be a small bit of waste or some program that we wouldn't support. But by and large, it's a very important program that we have a single refugee agency dedicated to Arabs who were displaced in a war that now almost 80 years ago, when every other refugee in the world is just fine to go to the UN's General Refugee Agency, or that AIDs is clean as a whistle, that they maybe have one or two small problems, but in reality they're doing very important work funding sex change surgeries in Guatemala or Sesame Street in Iraq. To acknowledge the reality of anything, though, is to acknowledge the failure of their broader progressive project, not just here, but around the world.
Two more questions, Senator. The first is Iran. If Israel delivers an ultimatum to Iran that says, if our people are not free, your oil industry will be destroyed and your nuclear sites will be pulverized, should the United States back them up?
As I've said since October 7th, 2023, we need to back Israel to the hilt. And I think now is maybe the best time for the United States to back Israel to the hilt, because they have shown, to borrow from our common enemy, that they are the strong horse once again. Over the last 6 months, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli government seems to have made a decision to, shall we say, settle all the family business. They have largely destroyed Hamas. There are some remnants remaining. They have largely destroyed Hezbollah. I don't even know who's in charge of it. Whoever it wasn't important enough to have a pager 4 months ago. But they have destroyed Iran's missile defenses and air defenses. Now is the time to finish the job, to totally neuter Iran's capability to threaten Israel and the United States for the foreseeable future.
All right, Senator, I want to switch to the courts. There are at least 4 TROs, or permanent injunctions, against initiatives of President Trump. 3 of those have come from Obama and Biden judges. 1 comes from a senior district court judge in Washington State that I regret to say was a Reagan appointee. But that was the dumbest of the opinion. This is, in my view, massive constitutional overreach, directing the executive branch how to run audits of the executive branch. What do you think?
Well, Hugh, all this is to be expected. Donald Trump and his senior advisors knew that Democrats would continue the lawfare that they launched against him during the campaign in 2016, through the special counsel's office, through the impeachment, and then most egregiously when he's out of office, trying to indict, convict him, and imprison him for the rest of his life. But I suspect most of these cases are going to work their way through the court. The administration will win in the vast majority of them. I do want to single out one as just a particularly egregious overreach. This is by a judge named Paul Engelmeyer in New York, who on an ex parte basis, in the dead of night on Friday, a clear case of liberal Democratic attorney generals judge shopping in a way that would preclude the Trump administration from even being overheard, purported to bar not just Elon Musk and his associates from Treasury Department systems and records, but the Secretary of Treasury himself. This Judge Engelmeyer seem to elevate career bureaucrats over politically accountable Senate-confirmed officials, something that is unprecedented, to my knowledge, in the annals of American law.
I agree with that,
To be
Senator.
overturned immediately.
I would hope that it is lifted immediately. I would also put this in your ear for your friends on the Budget Committee. He's not a senior status judge. He should never be a senior status judge. We got to get rid of senior status judges. You can have lifetime tenure, but I don't think the Constitution obliges us to pay for the retirements of senior status judges. And I don't want that guy or any of these people getting tenure for life. And maybe you ought to relook at funding senior status judges as chambers. I think that fits under reconciliation and their salaries, and I believe it's constitutional. One of the great things about getting outside of the Beltway is you meet different people and you find out about different things. And at a recent Legatus meeting, I heard about Santiago Catholic Trade School. I said, I want to bring them on so that the whole country can hear about this. And so Father Glenn Baton, I hope I'm getting that right, Father, and Mark McElrath joining me. Father, did I pronounce your name right?
You did not, but that's okay. I'm used to it. It's Baton.
Baton. Okay. All right. And
Mark,
there you
go, sir.
I can't screw up McElrath, right? I can't get that wrong.
You got it right, Hugh. It's good to be with you. Good pronunciation.
I would like to begin. We got about 20 minutes. And I'll play it all and put it all up. I want people to understand what Santiago Catholic Trade School is and where it came from. So I'll start with you, Father Glenn.
So this was an idea that Dan Dulac, who's the founder of the Retreat Center, and Mark McElrath had, along with an educator, a Catholic educator by the name of Chris Weir. He's local here. And Chris had mentioned that I guess there were a couple of different locations, one in Ann Arbor? No. Mark knows. Two different locations that we were keyed into about trade schools, Catholic trade schools that are being set up for young people, for young men, as an alternative to just getting a job after high school, or after moving out of the house for the first time, or going to college. But it's an opportunity for these young men to live in community, to have a pace of life that is based on the cycle of the church: daily prayer, daily mass, morning and evening prayer, mass, recitation of the rosary, adoration, things like that. Helping out also with our ministry as a retreat center, which gives them the opportunity for hospitality and learning about what it is, because that's who we are. We are Santiago Retreat Center, and we have tens of thousands of people that come over our threshold per year. Confirmation groups, adult ed groups, you name it, schools, and avail themselves of a beautiful, bucolic setting that's very close to everyone, but it's in the middle of nowhere, basically, in the Santa Ana Mountains. And so that's been our mainstay. So Chris Weir came up with this idea about, or presented the idea about this trade school as something that we might be able to actually put together, which is what we did. We started out with just a cadre of, I think it was 8 guys. Then we expanded, doubled the size to 15, and now we've taken 5 more young men on. And so they're learning the trades. It's just a general introduction at first to construction, how to swing a hammer, make sure you know the top end to the bottom end of a hammer. It's an introduction to them. What's that?
I flunk. There are no tools in my house.
Flunk,
so
okay.
I could have gone.
As do many of our first semester students.
Mark,
there's that.
Go ahead, Father.
What you? Yeah. So there's the focus we have is building a house. That's going to be kind of like the idea. Why we build a house, how we build a house. So why we build a house is the trade part of it, if you will, or how to build a house. Why we build a house is kind of like a theological question or a philosophical question about what is a home. And so we're trying to get our young men to wrap their minds around that, and then how to run a house, so that when these young men, if it's the Lord's will for them, that they're called into the beauty of holy matrimony, they'll know how to be, leaders in their homes. So it's that whole the hands-on, the philosophical, theological, faith consideration as a whole package deal. We have these guys for 2 years, and it's a time of great formation. We're very, very excited. It's very incipient. We're only a year and a half, 2 years old. But what this portends, Hugh, going forward, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and not us, there are other trade schools that are either on the drawing board or actually in operation now. But it's a great opportunity for the church to allow her young men to be engaged in life in a way that's positive, that helps with a career, helps family building, helps the formation of the ecclesia domestica, the church, the home is the church. There's a lot of meat on this bone, and we're super excited that we took Chris Weir up on his idea, and then Dan and Mark ran with it, and this year and a half, 2 years later, we now have this viable school. It's super, super exciting. For me personally, it's very... it's just beautiful. You follow the will of the Holy Spirit, and you're doing things that 2 and 3 and 5 years ago you never even imagined.
Let's pause it right there. I'm going to come back with these two gentlemen in tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday to make sure everyone hears about SantiagoTradeSchool.com. SantiagoTradeSchool.com. Go and visit it. Victorino Mattis. I always like to spell out his name so people can find him on X. It's Victorino Mattis, Vic Mattis. Is the Washington Free Beacon's weekend editor. He's also the co-host of Getting Hammered podcast, which I listened to with great amusement on Saturday when I got lost on an 11-mile trundle, Vic. Here's what I have to ask you. Now, I have 3 things to cover with you: Serial, Nashville, and Doge. So let's first start with Serial. I thought you two rather maliciously overlooked the nutritional advantages of Captain Crunch.
Well, I'm probably stealing this. I believe I'm stealing this from the director Quentin Tarantino, who once made a quip that, Captain Crunch is great if you like to shred the roof of your mouth.
Captain
really
Crunch
hard
is
stuff.
fortified. You mentioned fortified cereals, and I whenever my wife would leave and it was just the kids and me, I'd go out and buy like 3 boxes of Captain Crunch, and they'd be gone whenever she came back.
Yeah, it's part of your, it's related to your orange food diet, isn't it? It's sort of on the more golden hue of it, but it's right up there, and it's quite tasty and very hard and crunchy, and it could cut you up if you're not patient with it.
Well, you were out there. I don't know if you endorse grape nuts. I don't know if you tried grape nuts.
that
I've
was
never
Mary
allowed grape
Catherine.
nuts in my house.
No, I told Mary Catherine it's like gravel mix. She's a big champion of grape nuts. That's really not for me. I think that's something that's probably very dangerous for some people. Really.
That may actually lose her a slot on the Hugh Hewitt show because I really cannot abide the idea of grape nuts. Next, how did you manage to screw up Nashville? Nashville's like the easiest town in the. I hope you stopped at the graveyard of James K. Polk.
No, it's so funny. When I was in Charleston, I happened to stumble upon the grave of John C. Calhoun.
Oh yeah, I saw that
just across from the old church.
It's just enormous. You can't miss that.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's the big family plot is over there. It's a giant sarcophagus. But no, I didn't make it to James K. Polk in in Nashville. Again, my first time just going down Broadway and John Lewis, I think it's Boulevard, and it's quite a city.
Mr. Polk's right there.
My first foray.
He's right under the bridge.
I did not make it over there or to cross the Cumberland River to the Grand Ole Opry and pass by the Ryman Auditorium, the Church of Country Music. Again, I have to go back. It was a great place. It really had me entranced.
I think James K. Polk may be the most resented president by our friends in Mexico, other than Donald Trump.
Yeah. Quite possibly. Quite possibly.
Right. So, Vic, did you wear a cowboy hat?
No, as one of our listeners told me and warned me, the cowboy hats are really for tourists' bachelorette parties. And then after that, it's up and coming country stars that wear the country hat. But I saw plenty of them.
I want to go to Doge. Because the reaction to Doge, which you folks captured using some audio, including Chuck Schumer, was really quite amusing. Do you think if Eliana came in, that's the editor, I don't know who your publisher is, or your publisher showed up and they said, We're going to look at every line item of the expenditures here because the Free Beacon's $1.6 trillion in the red. Do you think you could walk out or create any kind of a stir, Vic?
I think there'd be a bit of a panic if it was $1.6 trillion. Other than that, of course, open the books. We're more than happy to. We've got nothing to hide. It seems like they've got something to hide based on their reaction in that ridiculous rally protest in front of USAID and shedding these sort of crocodile tears about the shutting down of this agency. Again, there's important stuff that they do. There are carve-outs for that, for helping people, for helping children, to fighting AIDS in Africa or malaria, you name it. We can still do it under our acting USAID director, Marco Rubio. But short of that, let's look at why we're spending, money on DEI operas and comic books and LGBTQIA2S plus, initiatives in countries that are extremely, very, very Christian in their traditions. And I just don't think that's the right way that American taxpayers want their money spent. And if they say that, oh, it's not a big deal, it's a drop in the bucket, well, tell that to the folks in, again, Western North Carolina. They can use that money.
Now a technical question. Getting Hammered podcast, which is really fabulous. I recommend it to everyone. And it's a crossover podcast, meaning that husbands and wives like it. Both my wife and I love to listen to Vic and Mary Catherine. Do you have a limit on how long you can go? Because the amount of news you've got to cover. You guys do your fun chit chat like Grape Nuts in Nashville.
We do.
And then you've got like an armada, the Spanish armada of news every week coming down the river. What do you do?
Yeah, we have a list of targets, Hugh, of things we want to discuss. And if we're lucky, we get to half of them. We say, well, how was your day? Oh, I don't have much to discuss. And then 15 minutes later, we're talking about cereal or
Yes.
Nashville for that matter. So it's very organic. We just let it sort of just give it a natural flow. We didn't want to do a kind of show where it's like, hello, I'm Vic Madison. She's Mary Catherine. And here's the news. We wanted to, it's a kind of conversation you want to have around the kitchen table, or you're keeping you company as you're on your commute.
But do you have a hard out? I mean,
No, I would say we tend to. I originally wanted 45 minutes as a hard out. I think that's good enough time, and that sort of then changed to about 60 minutes. And then the next thing you know, we do have a running clock. I call it the shot clock. And that's often hitting well past 60 minutes, 70 minutes.
Oh, you're like a soccer game. We never know when a soccer game is going to be over.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It never is when it says it's over. It just keeps on going. There's all that extra time. But we try to keep that and then save it for the second show of the week.
Last question, because tomorrow I have a column coming up in Fox News about how new media is combined with old new media to destroy legacy media. Which podcast do you listen to, Vic, other than your own?
Other than my own, and of course the Hugh Hewitt show, I get a lot of my cheat sheet notes from commentary because they are relentless. It's 5 days a week. I don't know where they get the energy. It's over an hour, and that's about all the time I have to catch up.
Be very careful, Vic.
You didn't mention Dwayne's World, and I don't blame you.
Oh, right. And Dwayne, of course, Dwayne Patterson. How could I forget?
You did forget. Because lots of people do. I forgot to credit him earlier today with a bit that I came up with, but still my bit. Vic, I just give a look at that list. I start every day with commentary. I don't know how they do it. I really don't know how they do it, but it's 5 days a week, an hour and 10 minutes sometimes, and it's
Good
organized.
stuff.
Getting Hammered. That's Vic Mattis. Go find it, download it, like and subscribe. Learn about the toddlers and everything that went wrong in the super fun site that is Mary Catherine's house now. I'm so glad we're out of football season so that we can get into draft season, the season that matters the most to Cleveland Browns fans. And it's not really that exciting because we're going to take whoever's left, Cameron, Ward, or Shador Sanders, one or the other. And I think the Titans are going to take one, and then we're going to take the other. Because you haven't got a quarterback, you haven't got a team. And we don't have a quarterback. We don't even have a banged-up old veteran. We got to go find a banged-up old veteran that doesn't throw more interceptions than they do TDs. And I don't know where we're going to find that banged-up old veteran, but I am here to tell Andrew Berry, love the work you're doing, think you got some bad breaks, didn't like the trade, but everyone knows that. It was a bad deal, but you took a big swing, and you missed. So we got to get a quarterback. And then maybe Myles Garrett will stay, and everything will be forgiven, just like Lamar Jackson, but you got to get a quarterback. So don't talk to Myles until after you draft a quarterback. and then a running back at the start of round 2, and we're back in business. Sign a bunch of offensive line free agents, and we're in good shape. Need a linebacker as well. But that's just a few. 9 draft choices. The Browns are going to contend next year. Now, Michael Waltz on with Kristen Welker yesterday. Cut number 10.
Elon is the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, and if there is any agency what I have a ton of experience with in the Department of Defense with an $800 billion plus budget, it's DOD. Everything there seems to cost too much, take too long, and deliver too little to the soldiers. I, as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, held up a bag of bolts that would cost $100 in a hardware store that cost $90,000 to the United States Air Force. And the American people have said enough. Enough with the bloat and the waste and the debt. And when we have $1 trillion of interest in our debt that's exceeded our entire defense budget, we do need great minds and we do need business leaders to go in there and absolutely reform the Pentagon's acquisition
Michael
process.
Waltz, end of story. That's the end of story. We need great business leaders to go in there and reform. Happy to welcome back Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Welcome back, Admiral. This afternoon, news broke that Senator Lindsey Graham has proposed a big spending bill that includes an uptick of $150 billion for the Department of Defense. Is that enough? And if so, how should it be spent?
Well, thanks for having me, Hugh. And you're exactly right. This $150 billion is kind of the midway between the $200 billion Senator Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, was asking for, and the $100 billion that was generally being pushed around by other members. So I think 150 is probably about right. It's spread over 4 years. I think, in other words, I think they'll use it in FY 25, 26, 27, 28. It may be less years, but still 150 billion. Is it the right number? It's a big number, but it also has 4 big tasks, fix the Navy, and fix shipbuilding, fix the nuclear weapons enterprise, Sentinel, Columbia, B-21, fix, build Iron Dome for America, and then fix military readiness. That's a lot to be done with $150 billion.
Now, it's, of course, in addition to the other DOD spending, but let's walk through each of them. Fix the Navy. What does that even mean? Does it mean new shipyards or reopening shipyards that have been closed or expanding ones that are currently operating?
Yes. So all 3. I think you hit it right on there. So first and foremost is shipbuilding. The reason the Navy is in a bad place is not actually aircraft production. In the end, we have been able to build the number of F-35s, F-18s, Hawkeyes, all those kind of planes that are on a carrier that we want. Now, we may not build enough of them, but we could have. What we can't do is actually build enough of the ships we really need. And first and foremost among those are submarines. We want to build 3 attack submarines a year. That is the ones that go shoot other submarines and ships. We build, instead of the 3 we want, we actually pay for 2, and we get 1.2 or 1.3. That is not how that's not how you fight an adversary. So submarine construction is number 1. Then submarine repair would be number 2. And then general ship repair would be number 3. And that 15, whatever percentage of the money they get, that shipbuilding, it will not be enough to fix the problem. It will just staunch the bleeding.
Admiral, where do we expand submarine repair and construction facilities?
So I think there's a little bit in our forward deployed. In other words, if you could fix a few more things when you're forward in Guam or Australia or somewhere in the Mediterranean or in the UK, the more you can fix when it first happens, the problem, you will actually really help readiness. So there's a little bit of that, but the vast majority of this is about improving the construction facilities in Connecticut, the construction facilities in Virginia, and then the repair facilities that are spread on the East Coast and the West Coast. So it's going to be all over the United States, but I think the biggest investments will probably be in Connecticut and Virginia.
Now, Admiral, 10 years ago, in the first question I've ever asked at the 5 presidential debates I've moderated, I asked both then candidate, now President Trump, and then Senator, now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, If you had to choose between the three legs of the triad, which one would you choose? Both gentlemen declined to answer that. And for a variety of reasons, people don't want to tip their hand one way or the other. I don't think we can do all three in time to make one of them really strong. Which one would you do first?
And I'm going to say this, and it's not because I'm a retired admiral, but it is the Columbia class submarine, the ballistic missile submarine. And that's because it is a guaranteed second strike. What I mean by that is it will survive a first strike by an adversary, either Russia or China, the two countries that could do a first strike against us right now. And it will survive and be able to effect mutual assured destruction on the adversary. And therefore, it is the strongest leg of deterrence. It shouldn't be alone. We shouldn't have no stool works with one leg. You can make an argument for two legs, but I understand most stools work best with three legs.
Well, I share your opinion, but I'm a civilian. I don't know anything. I just read a lot. It seems to me that the Ohio class are running out of gas before the B-52s or the Minutemen do. So that's just my reasoning. Am I wrong?
So you're right. In other words, there is a fixed time on each of the Ohio class. It's the reactor fuel in their current refueling cycle. And I think some of these, we have been able to extend some attack submarines. I think the SSBNs are much different for a variety of reasons. As you know, as a surface nuclear officer in the Navy, so I have some understanding of this. I really think they're at end of life. They can be slightly extended by how we operate them, smart captains, smart senior leaders. But in the end, they're going to come to a conclusion over the next 6 to 18 years, the 12 of them. And we're going to have to replace them with these Columbia class. And so that needs to have, it is either you replace them or you don't have it. Those are your two, it's going to be a very binary choice.
Can we forward fund the entire, I think we're going to do 10 Columbia class. Can we just put the money in the bank to assure the primes that the money is there?
We can do multi-year deals that achieve that purpose. In other words, multi-year, multi-ship contracts that say, this is for 4 or this is for 6. We've been doing them with aircraft carriers for 2, with some destroyer contracts for 3. Now, these are much cheaper, the destroyer contracts, when you do multi-ship contracts. But I believe we just did an amphibious one for up to 11, where we guaranteed the production. Senator Wicker is obviously very happy with that. And but I think we could do that with submarines. Look, they know they're going to get 10. They know they're going to get 10. 10 is the minimum number that we're going to need to go forward. And there's an argument for more, but I'll say that. But a contract would help them in terms of loans and interest rates and things like that.
And workforce, right? What, don't they need to expand their workforce dramatically if we're going to do 10? I mean, really do 10 in time to replace the Ohios.
And it's, yes, sir, they do. And it's not just that. The almost exact same workforce is needed for those attack submarines, right? Where I said we're at 2 and we're paying for 2, we're getting 1.2 done, and we really need to pay for 3. That is the exact same workforce. And this is the conundrum for the United States. We need to produce kids who graduate from high school with an interest in STEM that are not going to university necessarily or college, and that are not going in the military. We need a STEM workforce. And both the Trump and Biden administrations thought about this, worked on it a little bit. There was something called Blue Forge Alliance to push it. We 100% need to emphasize this. It is almost as dire as the military recruiting shortfall, the defense industrial base recruiting shortfall.
You know, last hour I had on for the first part of a 3-parter, the priest and the head of operations at something called Santiago tradeschool.com, which is a 60 people at a time Catholic 2-year program to teach people how to weld, do stud lumber, pipe, plumbing, because there aren't enough of them. It's like a guaranteed income for life if you learn how to do it.
You're absolutely right. These STEM jobs are high paying, and they're high paying pretty early on in them. Once you finish your apprenticeship, they immediately become, and you, at this point, you have a job for your career. I'm going to say you have a job for life. These welding skills are going to be needed for the next 30 to 40 years as we build these types of ships and aircraft. There's probably a future where we build something different. But
Well, we ought
these
to put a
are
campus somewhere.
lifetime careers.
We ought to put a campus somewhere and just plop them down. Now, Admiral, we're low on time, so I want to ask you about Doge at DOD. I had a conversation yesterday with a Reagan alum like me, and we like Doge, but I'm not too sure about Doge at the Pentagon. What do you think?
So first, I want to set expectations. I know the president the other day said there'll be hundreds of billions of dollars maybe in savings at the Department of Defense. There will not be hundreds of billions of dollars in savings at the Department of Defense. I think we have been trying to chip away at that, at excess spending in the Department of Defense for 25 years. It's been seen as a bill payer. Is there excess money? Is there wasted money there? Yes. Could it be in the B's, with $1 billion? Yes. Is it even going to get to 10 billion? I'd be surprised. So just set expectations. And then you do have to be careful. There's a law of unintended consequences. The law of unintended consequences, when you cut off, USAID money for, drag queen training in Costa Rica, probably in a lot of consequences on that. The law of unintended consequences, when you undermine a Department of Defense program, is a really serious issue.
Well said, Admiral. If I can keep you for 3 minutes, I'm going to put this on the YouTube portion. I want to alert my Army friends. We're about to cut the Army in half, but you're going to have to listen to the YouTube thing to find out what Mark Montgomery thinks about that. I hope Senator Cotton's not listening anymore. Do we need to downsize the Army, and who gets Iron Beam? Is that Space Force? Is that Army? Is that Navy? Go for it.
So first, on the size of the Army, look, the Army, once China became the pacing threat, which is broadly an air maritime, not a maritime air, an air maritime fight. Look, the Army was going to have a lesser role. They still have a role to play in a European, if Russia were to attack a NATO ally. They still have a role to play in some of the issues going on in the Middle East. But if you're going to say you got to fund your first things first, you really need to get the Air Force squared away and the Navy squared away. We talked a lot about the Navy earlier. So I do think that has an impact on, if you have a fixed pie, that's going to have an impact on the Army. I think with this $150 billion, it takes a little of the pressure off of that, but not all of it. There isn't a lot of discussion of how you get the Air Force healthy in that $150 billion. So I do think there'll be some taking from the Army. I'd be careful doing that, though. What is easy to deconstruct is very hard to reconstruct. So we have to take a scalpel, not a chainsaw, to these kind of budgetary decisions with any of the services. In terms of Iron Dome, it is first of all, it needs to be architected by the Missile Defense Agency. We actually pay several hundred experts on missile defense, engineers, to do these things. So I think Secretary Higgs has hit it right out of the park in his discussions on this. He's pushing it towards the Missile Defense Agency. They've already put out requests for data. We have to think about it. It's going to be integrated over geography, which means it's going to be in space and near space, on the ground, and at sea. So it's going to involve all the services and Space Force. It's going to be commanded by NORTHCOM broadly. It's going to be integrated over time. The answer to what Iron Dome looks like 2 and 4 years from now is not going to be heavily space-based, but 6 and 8 years from now, it will be. If we're smart, we'll build this in a way that it iterates over time to defend us over time, to handle the Chinese and Russian threats, but principally Chinese threats that we're starting to see.
Help the civilians like me, Admiral. Who runs the missile? Is that a joint program? Who runs MDA?
So Missile Defense Agency is run by Lieutenant General Heath Collins. He's a Air Force 3-star, but it runs different services, have run it at different times. It's been Navy, Air Force, and Army over the last 24 years. It's generally a 3-star who has a lot of experience in building things. That's how you get that job. You don't get that job from commanding tons of things, although you might have had command earlier in your career. You're a person who designs and builds things. It's full of engineers, as I said, and officers who've operated equipment, who provide that operational expertise to the engineers.
30
it's just
seconds,
the right
Admiral.
place to do it.
Is it doable?
It is doable in terms of they will give the Secretary Higgs have asked for 3 options: small, medium, and large. It's the Goldilocks option, the medium one. It's doable to defend us against cruise and hypersonic missiles from China and Russia, and an errant ballistic missile launch from North Korea, not a full-out assault from China or Russia. That's mutual assured destruction.
Admiral Mark Montgomery, as always, keep coming back. That was I want to talk to you as the reconciliation unfolds, because there's going to be a lot of giving the these joints, and I appreciate your expertise with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy. Thank you, Admiral. Bethany Mandel is one of the authors at the Mom's War Substack. She also is a frequent guest on this program, many other programs. You can follow her on X at Bethany Shondark. Bethany, you have probably followed as close as any American the hostage crisis. When those 3 hostages appeared, were you as shocked as I was? Because I was pretty shocked, as was the President of the United States.
I was shook, but not shocked. We have been hearing from the hostages who were let out that they had been starved, that they had been chained, that they had been beaten. The testimony that came from the 3 men that were released on Saturday, they were the direct recipients of that experience, whereas the people who have been released prior, for the most part, weren't, because Hamas knew that they would be among the first to be released. The women, Yarden Bibas, Keith Siegel, who was an elderly American, but now Hamas is starting to get into the younger men who they've really, truly, brutally treated and tortured over the course of the last 16 months. And I think it was because of their testimony and just the shocking physical appearance that they came out with that led to Hamas saying we're gonna turn off the spigot and stop the hostage releases indefinitely. And I think that the prayer is that they're going to feed the people that they have left so that they don't come out as shockingly malnourished as the first 3 did. But there's a lot of fear also that they've realized that they're not as valuable anymore and they might start killing them.
Now, I'll tell you what set me up is Gadi Moses set me up. I thought this 80-year-old man came out looking like he hadn't left the kibbutz and smirking, and then these 3 younger men have obviously been tortured and starved. So Hamas is not just a terrorist, they're a barbarian. Well, everyone knew that from 10/7, but we have been reminded of it. Yeah. Do you think, I asked Dr. Oren this earlier, but I want to ask you, do you think opinion has changed about whether or not to proceed with this deal in Israel?
I think that there's a sense of desperation. We've been saying as a civilized society and Western civilization, never again, never again. And now we're seeing history reflected back to us on our phones. We're seeing two men who emerged from hell to discover that their wives were both killed. And that one of those men, also his daughters were killed that day as well. And they mocked him on stage. They pulled him on stage. Eli Sharabi, they pulled him on stage. He is easily 70 pounds lighter than he was when he was kidnapped on October 7th. And they put him on stage and they asked him, "What are you most looking forward to seeing?" And he said, "My wife and my daughters." And the person who was interviewing him laughed. This is the level of barbarity that we're facing. And I think that Hamas has been trying to portray themselves in a positive light for a lot of the Western world who do eat up what they say. Oh, these girls, they weren't mistreated. But when you see those men come out and they can't even walk, the game is over. And I think that Hamas realized that they're not coming out looking very good here.
So let me ask you, do you want Israel? Hey, I want America to do whatever Israel wants to do. That's my default proposition. If Bibi says we're going back to war, good on you. Because I think Blinken and Sullivan and Biden lied to us. I think they knew and they didn't tell us. Number 2, do you think a threat to Iran would be effective? In other words, everybody out in 2 weeks, or we're taking out your oil facilities and your nuclear site.
So I wrote this, I believe it's running in the New York Post tomorrow, but I wrote a piece, I believe for the New York Post, basically saying, in the aftermath of World War II, there was a lot of questions about why FDR didn't bomb the railroad tracks leading into Auschwitz. And that was one of the things that stained his record permanently forever, especially among the American Jewish community. And I think that this is that moment for the American Jewish community when it comes to the hostages. There's an Auschwitz in Gaza where 76 people, including Americans, are being held, and something really drastic needs to be done to get them out right now. John and Rachel Goldberg-Poland were both on Dana Perino's show today, basically saying that this has changed the calculus and added a a level of urgency that was not there a week ago. I don't know what it needs to take. I think that, threatening the Qataris with, we're going to shut down the base, we're going to apply sanctions, you need to expel Hamas leadership. Everything has to be on the table because these hostages that are in Gaza, we now see they don't have days, they don't have weeks, and they certainly don't have months.
So I know you didn't hear the beginning of the show. I began with spring 1944. Roosevelt is given undeniable evidence of Auschwitz and the tracks and the excuses that were brought up by Strategic Air Command. We can't divert the bombers. We might hit the prisoners. None of them availing to history. It's a black mark on FDR and his State Department at the time, which was anti-Semitic. So that's part of the historical record. But I don't think threatening anybody but Iran will actually work. And do you think Israel will do that?
So there was indications that there was communication between Hamas leadership and Iran immediately preceding this announcement that they were going to shut off the hostage releases. So I think that that is true. I think that there's leverage that can be deployed with Qatar. I, I don't know how much, but I think that both Iran and Qatar need to be on the table with exercising maximum pressure in order to bring this crisis to an end before
Now,
the
the
end of the
Goldberg
month.
Paulins are going to be my guests this week. They've asked to come on. Of course, I'm going to give them the platform. Do you think the hostage families agree with a ultimatum like this?
No, the hostage families are not a monolith. A lot of them believe different things. I'm glad that John and Rachel are going to be on your show. I think that they represent a pretty moderate voice within the parties. I think every family that I've ever spoken to appreciates their leadership, and I think that they are wonderful spokesmen for this crisis. I think that they're pretty careful not to put themselves in a position to be prognosticators and telling politicians what to do. Their mission is to just, talk about the level of urgency. And, their son Hirsch, who was an American citizen, when his body was recovered, the torture and the starvation were apparent, not just with him, but with the 5 hostages that were executed along with him. One of the young women was 79 pounds the day that she was murdered. So I think that they can really extend the level, they can express the level of desperation that all of these families are feeling to get a deal done, whatever it is.
Now, Bethany, I want you to go Old Testament with me. How righteous will be the anger of the Jewish people if this does not resolve soon?
I mean, the anguish is unlike anything. I mean, the last
Not anguish,
16 months has
anger.
been real anguish.
Anger.
I know. I don't know. I don't know. It's something that we will never forget. I can say that for certain. This has changed the American Jewish community. It's changed the Israeli left. When President Trump said that the United States was going to take over Gaza and clean out the Palestinians there, the Israeli left, for the most part, were like, okay, if that's what it has to take, that's what it has to take.
Bethany, we should have known, we ought to have known, and perhaps we did at one level know what they were doing in the tunnels. But do you think the American reaction has changed to mirror that of Donald Trump's on the plane yesterday?
So I think that it did not get enough coverage on Saturday. And I think that's part of why Hamas is releasing these folks on Saturdays, is to bury the coverage. There is an American who was on the list who, there was only 3 more releases scheduled. And there was an American father. He's in his mid-30s. His name is Sagi Dekel-Chen. He was taken from his home in Kibbutz Nir Oz. And that would have been front page news. If he emerged from the tunnels in that condition as an American, the son of a university professor, that to me, I think, would have broken through the sound wall it feels like we have in the American media covering this issue. I think that's what it would have
Sound
done.
wall,
And perhaps that's
I don't know if you watch Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan yesterday got in an argument with Bill Haggerty about whether UNRWA was part of Hamas or not. I mean, the level of stupidity is just immense.
Yeah.
She's not unique.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of in the
I mean,
beltway. You can't say it.
there's also just a total apathy about the humanitarian crisis that's happening among these hostages. There's so much ink spilled about the situation in Gaza, and I'm not going to, discount or dismiss the fact that it is a humanitarian crisis, and that's part of why I support President Trump saying we need to relocate these, Palestinian civilians out of Gaza because it's just not safe. But what we've seen and what we've heard from these hostages that have been released, and what the conditions are for the remaining hostages, how are we not screaming this from the rooftops? I see it on your show, and I see it on Fox. I don't see it in the mainstream media. I don't see concern for Eden Alexander from New Jersey or Sagi Jekyll-Chen from Connecticut. Where's the outrage? Why don't people know their names?
So last question. Should the Israelis return to war? In other words, they shouldn't leave Netzarim. That should be a non-starter since Hamas has broken the deal, but should they go back to killing Hamas?
If this ceasefire doesn't go through, absolutely. And I'm hearing from friends who are enrolled in, enlisted in the IDF as reserve soldiers, that they're getting the call, get yourself ready, because we're going to go in guns blazing like we did in October of 2023 if this deal falls through. And they need to.
That means Saturday. Bethany Mandel, always welcome. Thank you for joining me on a grim Monday following a grim Saturday. I appreciate the time very much. Bethany is always on top of this more than anyone, and I appreciate that very much. Let me talk to you about Job Creators Network, longtime sponsor of the program. They have a brand new website up called educationfreedomusa.com. educationfreedomusa.com. We are learning again and again that public schools are failing all across the United States. Some aren't, but most are. The nation's report card demonstrated that reading, we've got more than a third of our 8th graders are illiterate. They can't read in the United States. That's a third, cannot read. That is the end of the bell curve on public education. It's a disaster. There's only one way to fix it. There's only one way to fix it, which is overhaul or leave. You can't leave unless you have a choice. I mean, it's not possible for most American families to do the heavy lift of a private school education. When I went to Catholic school, it was $300 a year. That's in the 70s. I don't know what it is now. I think it's about $8,000 to $9,000 in Northern Virginia for an ordinary Catholic school. I don't know. My kids didn't go to Catholic school. So I don't know what it costs in California, but I don't know how anyone affords it. That is ordinary. But Job Creators Network realizes they're not going to have people to fill the jobs they're creating unless they get school reform. So they have begun Education Freedom USA now. Let me do that again. EducationFreedomUSA.com. Go there now. EducationFreedomUSA.com. I'll repeat it again. EducationFreedomUSA.com. Now, I already got an email. That was a great segment on the trade school. Tell me more. That is called Santiago. What's it called, Adam? Santiago Tradeschool.com. SantiagoTradeschool.com. I went to their website. It's not .org, it's .com. And of course, we got that wrong. We always get that wrong in the interview. I'll play the rest of the interview tomorrow. We're going to post the entire interview this afternoon. Harley's going to do that. SantiagoTradeschool.com. And don't overwhelm them. I hope they're built for traffic. SantiagoTradeschool.com. It's not a fix your broken kid program. It's not adventure outdoor, whatever they call that one when kids have substance abuse problems. It's not that. It's where young men go who want to work with their hands for a life, who want to be a tradesman, who know the kind of money that welders and carpenters make. SantiagoTradeschool.com. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz was on Meet the Press yesterday, cut number 11.
When foreign aid is aligned with U.S. objectives and U.S. objectives meet the president's objectives as commander-in-chief, then it is. But that is not the case. Many of these senior aid officials have their own agenda, have gone in their own direction, and these programs, many of which are no longer authorized by Congress, just seem to continue in perpetuity. So we could talk the entire time about USAID. I have a lot of experience about it on the ground. But in these first 2 weeks, we've had major foreign leaders. We have the Mexicans putting thousands of their troops on the border, the Canadians putting their assets on the border, Panama moving away from Belt and Road, Colombia first refusing to take deportation, and then now taking it. And
Come on,
we can go on
Congressman
and on.
now, National Security Advisor, they're not going to ask you about the wins. They're not even going to, they don't even want to talk about aid because that's a win too. Cut number 13.
Well, it's perfectly reasonable to say, let's pause, and then let's let those key programs bubble up and come through. And that's exactly what we're doing through a waiver process. We have issued dozens and dozens of those waivers to let, for example, things like Ebola screeners and other programs get through. So Secretary Rubio, as the acting administrator, and I think that is perfectly appropriate for USAID to be kind of tucked into the State Department and better align with their mission, rather than just spreading money around, kind of peanut butter spreading all around the world. Let's line it with key objectives, key goals, and as those waivers go through, those payments are going through. So this is a pause, but I got to tell you, the president is ready to move quickly. He's ready to move boldly, and that's what his team is doing.
The commander-in-chief power is pretty complete. And the executive branch is a unitary thing, Article 2. And if an appropriation by Congress is hurt, even a line item, if the president says we can't do that, it's hurting our national interest, it doesn't have to be done. And go ahead, sue. Sue. There have been lots of cases on this. The president's commander-in-chief power is pretty complete. Try and sue over comic books in Peru. Cut number 14.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, Kristen, this is exactly what President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, Elon Musk, myself, and many others who have worked with USAID are talking about. All too often, these missions and these programs, number one, are not in line with strategic U.S. interests, like pushing back on China. They're doing all kinds of other things that, frankly, aren't in line with strategic interests or the president's vision, number one. Number two, often, all too often, only cents on the dollar actually makes it to people in need between the big contractors, the subcontractors, the local contractors. The dollars aren't being used wisely. We need to take a hard look at it. We need to move quickly, and that's exactly what's being done. And personally, I can tell you, I've worked out in the Middle East. We saw a radio station with a big "Built by America" USAID. We go inside, and there is literally a black turbaned mullah backed by Iran preaching anti-American hate, and yet the USAID officer in charge told me as a Green Beret, well, we're just building radio stations, we're just handing out food, that's our job, to just be humanitarian. No, we need to realign their mission and line it up with the president's foreign policy vision.
Impossible to argue, for a news person at least, unless you've been there and done that, try it. There were two other cabinet members out and about yesterday. EPA Director Lee Zeldin on Fox Business, cut number 8.
Right, and what we're seeing now is a line-by-line accounting. And not only is that important to make sure that funds in the past and currently are going out the right way, but it also resets the path forward. That there's going to be this level of accountability so that when grants are being distributed, that there's an expectation that there's going to be this line-by-line accounting. This should be the new normal. We saw inside of the EPA, we did our own research, and there was a story that came out on it towards the end of last week in the Free Beacon. A Canadian electric vehicle manufacturer declares bankruptcy after receiving $160 million from the EPA. Well, guess what? They still haven't given out $95 million worth of those school buses to 55 school districts. We're going to do that line-by-line accounting, too.
Okay, and then Sean Duffy, the new Secretary of Transportation, cut number 9.
So you see I-40 here behind me. This is the eastbound lane. It is completely washed away for much of the section between North Carolina and Tennessee. And so our role as the Department of Transportation is to provide money and expertise to the two departments in, again, North Carolina and Tennessee to rebuild this important stretch, this important artery that connects people and commerce, not just between the states, but across the country. And so we're out here looking at the damage and assessing how much money it's going to cost to do this rebuild. And by the way, it is going to be billions of dollars to rebuild just this stretch of the highway. Also, it's going to, as you see, it's been washed out through here. It's going to take rock to fill this back in and build the roadway back up. Well, we can get rock 30, 40 miles away. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money, but the Forest Service can partner with us, and we think they're really close, just about 1.5 miles over this mountain. We can get access to rock that'll drive down the cost and the time frame for which it'll take to rebuild this road. So, again, we're out here assessing and looking at how we can partner with local officials to rebuild quickly. And Donald Trump, he doesn't move at the speed of prior administrations. He moves lightning quick. So we want to go fast, we want to go cheap, and we want to go safe.
So I got to know, what was Pete Buttigieg doing for 4 years? What was he doing in the period of time since the hurricane hit North Carolina? I mean, really, what was he doing? What were they spending? They weren't building the electric charging stations. They weren't repairing the I-40 in North Carolina. They were not hardening up the battery factory in Monterey, south of Monterey, California, near Salinas. They weren't doing any of this. What was he doing? I cannot wait till we get to the audit of the DOT, because the DOT is going to be, it's just going to be awful. We're going to find so many wasted dollars. And I don't think we're going to balance the budget by audits. I do think Donald Trump messages, and his team all messages. And one of those messages, we're looking under every rock for what you've been paying and to whom you've been sending it. And we're going to find out, as Mary Catherine Ham said, this is the new era of explain yourself, please. Not vindictive, just explain what you've been doing. Donald Trump had a couple more clips I want to play from the Fox Super Bowl with Brett Baer yesterday, cut number 3.
We'll build beautiful communities for the 1.9 million people. We'll build beautiful communities, safe communities. Could be 5, 6, could be 2, but we'll build safe communities a little bit away from where they are, where all of this danger is. In the meantime, I would own this. Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians
no
have the
big
right
money
to return?
spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them, because if they have to return now, it'll be years before you could ever. It's not habitable.
You know, I'm so glad
It'll be years.
Brett asked that. Developers don't think in years. They think in terms of timelines to entitlement and then moving forward. It's going to be years unless they rebuild it in a terribly bizarre way. Let me remind everyone, I'm in the Relief Factor studio. Took my Relief Factor in hour number 1. Remind you about it in hour number 2 and hour number 3 of every program every day, Monday through Friday. You won't see it over at the YouTube channel. You won't hear it on the podcast. Maybe you'll hear it on the podcast. I don't know. But I know that I am sponsored by it, and I want you to know this is the Relief Factor studio. Looks just like the Relief Factor studio inside the Beltway. And they're both sponsored by Relief Factor, and I do take it every day. Now, I do not recommend that you go out and start doing what I did on Saturday. I got lost. I did 11 miles. Didn't intend to, but you go, the hills of Orange County can get a little complicated. So I got a little bit lost. Nothing serious. But because I worked my way up, a little bit tired, but I had no aches and pains on Sunday. None at all. No. Relief Factor works. No aches and pains this morning. 6 miles today. No aches and pains. Why? Relief Factor works. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. 4 pills in every pack. When you get your starter pack for $19.95, the 3-week supply, they encourage you, they recommend, and it's what I did, is take 3 a day for the first 3 weeks. Get your levels of those 4 ingredients up, then maintain them 1 a day. Relief Factor works. Call them, the number 4, and the word relief. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, or head to their website, relieffactor.com. Can we please play cut number 6 before we get out of time?
A couple of court losses, Mr. President, and J.D. Vance said judges aren't allowed to control the executive power. What's your take on that?
Well, we're going to see what happens. We have a long way to go, and we're talking about fraud, waste, abuse. And when a president can't look for fraud and waste and abuse, we don't have a country anymore. So we're very disappointed with the judges that would make such a ruling. But we have a long way to go. We have to find all of the fraud that's going on. We have tremendous fraud, tremendous waste, and tremendous abuse, and theft, by the way. And the day you're not allowed to look for theft and fraud, etc., then we don't have much of a country. So no judge should frankly be allowed to make that kind of a decision.
Well, they get to make the decision, Mr. President, and you've always abided by them. But he's right. It's an outrageous couple of decisions over the weekend, but it will out. It will out. I always tell my law students there will be a decision.